I smiled when he mocked me again, right in front of his friends, just like always. But this time I didn't shrink. I didn't laugh it off. I waited, I watched, and when the timing was just right, I said one sentence that made the whole room go silent. He didn't see it coming, and I didn't need to shout. I just let the truth slip. If you've ever been humiliated behind a smile, this story is for you. My name is Leah Parker, and I was 39 years old when this happened. It had been almost a decade since I married Ryan. 8 years, 3 cities, 1 failed pregnancy, and a house that looked better in photos than it ever felt to live in. I was a marketing consultant, mostly remote work, juggling client calls and project decks from a sunlit home office that Ryan never once stepped foot into. We were what people called stable, but I had started to wonder what that word really meant. That night, everything looked perfect. One of those cozy Saturday evenings you imagine turning into a warm memory. Candles lit, a slow roast in the oven, our closest friends gathered around the table, laughing, clinking glasses. I had just come off a draining week, but I'd made an effort. I wore my wine-colored silk blouse. Ryan used to say it made my eyes look darker, more intense. I guess I still wanted to be noticed. Dinner parties had always been my thing. I loved the quiet control of it, folding napkins just so, arranging wildflowers in low vases, finding the perfect Spotify playlist to hover behind the conversations. I wanted the night to feel effortless, even if it took effort. That's how I handled most things, make it look easy so no one sees how hard you're working to hold everything together. Ryan had invited his college friends this time. Tom, the kind of guy who bragged about crypto at brunch. Nina, flawless in that curated Pilates and collagen kind of way. And Sam, Ryan's business partner, sharp, smug, and always watching. They filled the room with stories that made me feel like I was eavesdropping on someone else's life. Still, I poured wine, offered seconds, laughed at things I didn't find funny. I tried not to notice the way Ryan changed around them, how his tone got louder, his words quicker, his arm around my chair more performative than affectionate. I tried not to notice how, whenever I opened my mouth, he subtly shifted the spotlight away from me. I'd gotten good at pretending, too good maybe. After dessert, I stood and raised my glass for a quick toast, just a thank you, for coming, for being part of our little circle. Nothing dramatic, but halfway through my sentence, Ryan cut me off with a smirk. Maybe she'll actually cook next time too, he said, loud enough to draw laughter from the table. And just like that, the room turned against me, softly, unknowingly, like it always did. I didn't show it then. I laughed, a practiced, polished sound, but something in me flickered. I knew this was the last time I would let him write the story for both of us. If you've ever felt yourself disappearing in your own marriage, if you've ever smiled through humiliation just to keep the peace, stay with me. Because that night, I didn't scream, I didn't cry. I just let the truth slip and watched the room unravel. And if this story resonates with you or reminds you of a moment when you reclaimed your voice, please consider subscribing. I'm working toward my first 1,000 subscribers, and your support means the world to me. Every like, every comment, every share helps me keep telling these stories that so often go unheard. I stood there, glass in hand, still mid-sentence, when Ryan dropped the line. Maybe she'll actually cook next time, too. It hit with perfect comedic timing, enough to draw a ripple of laughter from the table, but not enough for anyone to question it. That's the thing about subtle cruelty. It always hides behind a smirk. I smiled, too, because I'd trained myself to. I even gave a little laugh, soft and polite, as I lowered my glass and pretended the toast had gone exactly how I wanted. But something inside me fractured, not all at once, not like a plate shattering, more like the slow crack of porcelain under pressure, barely audible but irreversible. I looked around the table. Tom chuckled into his wine. Nina gave a playful roll of her eyes and said, "Oh, Ryan." Sam just smirked like he'd been waiting for the punchline. No one noticed my silence, or if they did, they pretended not to. It wasn't the first time. There had been other moments, quieter ones, times he'd made jokes about how I worked from bed, even though I managed a team of 8, times he'd mentioned how I forgot to pick up the dry cleaning, never mind the 15 other things I did that day. He never yelled, never hit. He was too clever for that. His weapon was always performance. I remembered one night last year during a similar dinner when I'd brought up a book I was reading about boundary setting. He'd laughed and said, "Leah's reading self-help books now. Guess I'm in trouble." Everyone had laughed then too, so had I. But this time felt different. Maybe it was the build-up. Maybe it was the way he said it, like he was inviting the room to share a private joke about me. Or maybe it was the way no one defended me. Not even a soft, "That's not fair, Ryan." I sat down quietly, feeling the warmth drain from my face. The roast tasted bland, the wine too sharp, every sound around me felt distant, the clink of cutlery, the muted hum of conversation. I heard it all like I was underwater. Across the table, Ryan was in his element, laughing, topping off glasses, sliding effortlessly into his next anecdote about a client who wanted the impossible on a deadline. Everyone was charmed, everyone except me. I excused myself to the kitchen, not dramatically, just a soft exit. I said I was checking the dessert, though everything was already plated. I stood there by the sink, fingers curled against the granite edge, and for a moment I didn't move. I wasn't hurt, I was humiliated. And I knew in that moment I could either keep shrinking inside this marriage, or I could choose to be seen. When I walked back out, no one looked up. And that was the moment I decided. I wasn't going to raise my voice. I wasn't going to cry or beg for respect. I was simply going to wait for the perfect moment. And then I'd tell the truth. The kind of truth that can't be laughed off. I stayed quiet for the rest of the meal. Not because I didn't have things to say, but because I needed time to feel everything I had been avoiding. Shame, resentment, a low-burning grief for the version of myself I had lost somewhere in this marriage. I watched the conversation move without me like a train I wasn't meant to board. The men debated sports and sales figures. Nina leaned in to compliment Ryan on the renovation he barely lifted a finger for, and I sat there invisible in my own home, smiling when I needed to and nodding when someone made eye contact. But inside, I was wide awake. That's the strange thing about humiliation. It's not loud, it's quiet, like the tightening of a string pulled too far, like the way you hear your heartbeat more clearly than the words being spoken around you. I thought about the years I'd spent learning how to swallow discomfort like medicine, how I'd brushed off the little digs because that's just how he jokes, how I'd made myself small so he could feel big. I thought about the times I wanted to stand up for myself and didn't because I didn't want to ruin the mood, or because I doubted whether what I felt was valid. But that night, I didn't doubt. I knew the weight of it was physical. I could feel it in my chest, in the back of my throat, in the tightness of my jaw. And at some point, something inside me shifted, not in a way anyone else would notice. I didn't push back my chair or announce anything, but I had made a decision. No more playing nice, no more quiet tolerance. He had humiliated me in front of people who barely knew me, and worse, he'd done it knowing I wouldn't fight back. Because that was our pattern. He'd throw the jab, and I'd patch the wound. But this time, I wanted him to see that I noticed, that I felt it, and that I wasn't going to let it pass. I started watching him more closely after that. Not out of affection, but out of strategy. I watched the way he leaned back when he spoke about himself, the way he checked to see if people were laughing. I noticed how performative it all was, how much he relied on being the funny, self-aware guy to avoid real accountability. I didn't know exactly what I was going to say yet, but I knew it would come. I just had to wait for the room to shift, for him to feel completely in control, so he wouldn't see me coming. That moment would arrive soon, and when it did, I'd be ready. By the time dessert was served, I had mapped it out in my head. Not a speech, not a confrontation, just one line, a single truth placed in the perfect silence. I didn't need to attack him. I just needed the room to see him, without the jokes, without the charm. Just for one moment, let the mask fall. Back at the table, the mood had shifted slightly. Wine had done its job. People were looser, louder. Nina leaned across the table, laughing at something Sam had said. Tom was on his third story about a disastrous team retreat. Ryan had poured himself a generous second glass of Cabernet and was now holding court with his usual flair. I watched him more than I listened. He was in the zone, loving the attention, basking in the way the group responded to him. That was always his high. Being the smartest man in the room, even if it meant diminishing the woman sitting next to him. He made another casual joke about our weekend plans. Leah's idea of a hike is walking to the wine aisle. More laughter. This time I didn't even smile. I just watched him. And when he glanced over, checking, as he always did, to make sure I was still playing along, I gave him nothing. Not cold, not angry, just still. He blinked, confused for a split second, then moved on. That's when I knew he wasn't untouchable. He just relied on me to protect his image. I was his shield, his silent partner in every self-deprecating punchline he threw that secretly landed on me. But I wasn't playing that role anymore, so I waited. I waited until the laughter died down, until glasses were half empty and the buzz of conversation softened into something more intimate. That's always when people get honest, when the performance fades just enough for real things to surface. Ryan leaned back in his chair and said, "Honestly, I don't know how Leah deals with me. I mean, I'm impossible, right?" He looked around for laughs. I didn't laugh. Instead, I tilted my head slightly, smiled softly, and said, "Well, therapy helped." The table went quiet. Ryan's face froze, caught between confusion and panic. Nina blinked. Tom shifted in his chair. Sam glanced at Ryan, then at me. I could feel the silence stretch, thick and expectant, and I let it. No follow-up, no elaboration. Just the truth, hanging in the air. It was the gentlest scalpel I could have chosen, no blood, no rage, just precision. He opened his mouth, then closed it. And for the first time all night, Ryan didn't have a comeback. The silence that followed my words didn't feel empty. It felt charged, like the moment before a thunderclap. Well, therapy helped. Just 4 words, spoken lightly, almost warmly. But the weight of them landed like a stone in the middle of that polished table. I didn't look at Ryan. I kept my eyes on my plate, gently pushing a piece of chocolate tart with my fork. Let the silence breathe. Let it sting. "Therapy?" Nina asked, her voice too bright. "Like couples therapy?" I looked up and smiled gently, folding my napkin. Numbered just me. There it was, a soft statement, nearly harmless on the surface. But inside that admission was a narrative Ryan had worked hard to avoid. Because if I was in therapy, that meant something was wrong. And if I'd gone alone, it meant he wasn't willing to come. Ryan let out a short laugh, forced, brittle. "Leah's been on this self-improvement kick. You know how it is, vision boards and yoga apps." He reached for his wine. His hand trembled slightly, but no one was laughing with him this time. Tom cleared his throat and looked at his watch. Nina took a delicate sip of water. "Sam?" Sam just stared at me. I didn't press. I didn't say more. I didn't need to. I knew the power of letting people draw their own conclusions. Instead, I turned to Nina and asked how her Pilates studio was going. Casual. Calm. I shifted the conversation like a hostess reclaiming her table. But the energy had changed. The rest of the evening unraveled slowly. People still spoke, but now with edges of discomfort. The laughter felt rehearsed. Ryan grew quieter, fidgeted more. He tried to steer the group back to lightness, asked Sam about work, complimented Nina's dress. But the room didn't return to him the way it had before. He had been the sun in that room all night. Now clouds had gathered. After everyone left, the house was too quiet. I walked to the kitchen and began stacking plates, giving him space to say something, anything, but he didn't. Instead, he stood by the sink with his arms crossed, watching me. Finally, he spoke. "You really had to say that in front of them?" I paused mid-step. "Say what?" "You know what, about therapy. You made it sound like I'm some emotionally abusive husband or something." I looked at him, really looked. "I didn't say that." "But that's what they'll think?" I nodded slowly. "Maybe." He scoffed. "So what? This was revenge? Humiliate me in my own house?" "No, Ryan," I said softly. "This was a mirror." He stared at me, chest rising and falling, but said nothing. "I've spent years making sure you looked good in front of people," I continued, "cleaning up after your jokes, laughing when you needed me to, staying silent when I should have said something. And tonight I didn't." I rinsed my hands and turned off the faucet. The sound of dripping water echoed for a few seconds before fading. "That's not humiliation," I said, drying my hands. "That's honesty. You just don't like how it feels." I left the dishes, went upstairs, closed the bedroom door behind me. I didn't cry. I didn't write in my journal or call a friend. I just sat at the edge of the bed, feeling a strange, quiet sense of alignment. Like my spine had straightened. Like my voice had come home. And what surprised me most? I didn't feel guilty. The next morning, the silence lingered like a guest who didn't know when to leave. I made coffee, 2 mugs, out of habit. Then I poured one down the sink. Ryan came down an hour later, still in the clothes he'd worn to bed. He looked at me like he expected an apology, or maybe a truce. But I didn't offer either. "Are we going to talk about last night?" he asked. I sipped my coffee. "We can." He stood awkwardly in the doorway like a stranger in his own kitchen. "I just think it was unnecessary. You embarrassed me." I tilted my head. Did I say anything untrue? He didn't answer. The truth was, he wasn't used to being seen without a filter. My presence had always been his buffer. I played the supportive wife in public so he didn't have to confront what he was actually saying or how it made me feel. But something about last night shifted the air between us. It wasn't dramatic, no shouting, no ultimatums. Just a slow erosion of his control over the narrative. Later that afternoon, he texted Sam and Nina to clear the air. I know because he left his phone on the table and the preview popped up. He said I was going through a tough time and overreacted, still trying to steer the story, but I didn't take the bait. I went about my day, emails, laundry, a quiet walk around the neighborhood. And when I got back, I started moving small things into a box. Not to leave, not yet, but just to remember that I could. That evening, he asked if I wanted to watch something together. I said I was tired. Went upstairs with my tea and read instead. The shift wasn't in grand gestures, it was in the subtle withdrawal of energy. I wasn't playing the supporting character anymore. I was rewriting the script. And for the first time in years, I could feel him realize it. In the weeks that followed, Ryan didn't bring it up again. He acted like things had returned to normal, made coffee without being asked, offered to pick up groceries, even suggested a weekend trip. As if a few surface-level gestures could unspill what had already soaked through. But I had changed, quietly, completely. I didn't rush to fix his discomfort. I didn't over-explain or smooth over awkward silences. I let the distance between us grow, not out of spite, but clarity. The silence wasn't cold, it was clean. One morning, as he left for work, he kissed my cheek and said, "Love you." I looked up from my laptop. "Okay." He froze just for a second, then left. There was no grand breakup, no slammed doors, but the emotional scaffolding of our marriage had collapsed. And I didn't try to rebuild it. Instead, I rebuilt something else. Me. I started therapy again, but this time with a different purpose. Not to understand him, his moods, his jokes, his silence, but to understand myself. Why I stayed so long, why I let myself become small. And slowly, I started growing back into myself. I went back to the things I loved, long walks, vintage bookstores, solo dinners at places with candlelight. I remembered I had once liked my own company, that I didn't need a stage to be heard, only a space that felt safe enough to speak. And Ryan? He stayed polite, careful. But something between us had frozen over. I think he knew it too, because when the foundation shifts quietly, you don't hear the collapse. You only feel the emptiness where connection used to live. Sometimes power doesn't come from speaking louder. It comes from no longer whispering just to keep the peace. That night at dinner, I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse him. I didn't list every time he chipped away at me with a joke disguised as affection. I just let the truth slip softly like a thread pulled loose from fabric. And everything started to unravel. He had spent years teaching me how to laugh at my own expense. I had spent years learning how not to flinch. But when I chose honesty over harmony, I wasn't trying to win. I was trying to wake up. And I did. If you've ever been the quiet one at the table, the one with the practiced smile and the full plate, I hope this reminds you that you don't have to stay silent forever. One sentence can change everything.